Welcome to Enviro Close-UP. I am Carl Grossman. The subject, Greenpeace, which defines itself as an international environmental organization that uses creative confrontation to force solutions to the world's environmental problems. And with us is Bill Richardson. He's the Deputy Executive Director of Greenpeace USA. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you for having me, Carl.
You try to deal with the world's environmental problems. What's, in your view, the worst?
Well, I would say that the greatest environmental problem that we face currently is global warming. As the Earth's temperature continues to rise, it poses considerable environmental consequences, some of which we're already starting to see in places like the Arctic, where the ice cap is melting at an unprecedented rate. And this is having a domino effect. For instance, the polar bear, who relies on the ice in the Arctic for hunting and for its survival, is being threatened with extinction as a result of global warming. In addition, the melting of the sea ice is causing sea levels to rise. Scientists are saying that the pattern of warming is going to lead to an increased pattern of severe and violent storms, similar to what we saw this past year with Hurricane Katrina. And what's happening in the Arctic is certainly crucial in and of itself for the implications that it holds for that region, but it's a bellwether. What's happening in the Arctic is really showing a trend and is showing what the rest of the planet will be facing 20, 30 years down the road. Just
quick on global warming, in connection with global warming. Your lawsuit involving polar bears.
Greenpeace, with two other environmental organizations, has sued the Department of Interior and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for ignoring a petition that we placed before them to list the polar bear under the Endangered Species Act as being threatened by global warming. Since we have filed that lawsuit, the Fish and Wildlife Service has now started to take measures towards listing the polar bear as endangered. It is being threatened by global warming. Its habitat is melting. It relies on the ice to hunt and ultimately relies on the ice for its survival. And the population of polar bears is declining. Currently, there are roughly 950 polar bears left, which marks a significant decrease over the last several years. And so it's crucial that the polar bear be protected. If they are listed under the Endangered Species Act, it will do two things. First of all, it will give the polar bear considerably greater chance to survive. Additionally, it'll force the United States, which is far behind the rest of the world in dealing with global warming, it'll force the U.S. to consider the implications of all of the greenhouse gases that we produce. Currently, the U.S. produces roughly 25% of all the global warming gases in the world, and yet we still are not part of this international effort to stop global warming. So by listing the polar bear, it'll force the United States to address this issue. And obviously, where the polar bear is important in and of itself, and saving the polar bear is critical. Also, the polar bear it's a canary in a coal mine, so to speak. It's a metaphor for the problems that we all face 20, 30, 40 years down the road as a result of climate change.
Energy has been a central theme of Greenpeace since its beginnings. These days, some people say, hey, alternative energy, so-called, it's here. I mean, it's on the shelf. It's ready to be utilized. A big area of so-called alternative energy is offshore wind. What's your stand on, because it's interesting, like in Cape Cod, where they want to put these wind turbines offshore. There's some opposition. Off Long Island, where they want to put wind turbines offshore. There's been some opposition. What's the Greenpeace stand on that?
Well, the Cape Cod Wind Project and the Long Island Wind Project are vying to become the first offshore wind facilities in the United States. And that's very significant for a couple of reasons. First of all, they would each provide a significant amount of clean renewable energy. The Cape Cod project would provide 75% of all of the Cape's energy needs, and the Long Island Wind Project would provide enough clean renewable power to power 44,000 homes. So in and of themselves, they represent a significant amount of renewable energy that could help combat global warming. More importantly, though, they are vying to become the first offshore wind facilities in the United States. If they go through, this opens the doors to the endless possibilities of offshore wind in the United States. Again, the United States is far behind the rest of the world in this. In Europe, wind is a significant contributor. Offshore wind specifically is a significant contributor in providing their power needs. So when these facilities are located and built, then it will open the door to the endless possibility of offshore wind power. Now, you're right, there is local opposition to it, specifically in the Cape. Long Island, not so much. Long Island has more or less embraced this project and endorsed it. On the Cape, though, what you have is you have a small minority of wealthy landowners who are opposing it for aesthetic reasons. And in some ways, it's some of these people, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., have been environmental leaders and have been the leaders on global warming, but now that something is going into his backyard, their backyard, they all of a sudden don't want to have anything to do with it. So in some ways, it's given a black eye to the environmental community because they're taking this not in my backyard approach. And their arguments don't hold water. The aesthetics are not a factor. There is minimal environmental impact. It's going to have little impacts on birds. It'll have minimal impact on the fishing grounds. Aesthetically, it'll have virtually no effect at all.
There's so many depressing things here. I mean, whether it's global warming or nuclear power, deforestation, or the pollution of the... Is there anything to be hopeful about?
There's a lot to be hopeful about. And I say this not only from my perspective as an environmental activist, but also as a parent. I have 2 young children. The other night we were watching 60 Minutes when the piece came on about global warming, and afterwards they were very troubled by it. And I was left to explain to them very delicately how global warming could potentially impact their future without wanting to lie to them, but also without wanting to alarm them. So they now, as young children, have this concern about global warming and the threats that it has on their environment. So as a parent, I obviously have concerns about these issues because it impacts their future. But at the same time, there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. We've had a lot of successes just this past year in a lot of the issues that we've been working on, where we've brought a lot of the traditional Greenpeace tactics and strategies to the table. For instance, just recently in an area called the Great Bear Rainforest on the west coast of Canada, we have been fighting for 10 years to protect this area of coastal temperate rainforest that's referred to as the Great Bear Rainforest. Coastal temperate rainforest is one of the rarest forest types on Earth. Recently, we were able to get an agreement between the Canadian government, the logging industry, and Native communities to protect 15 million acres of this old-growth forest. 5 million acres is set off and protected from logging entirely. The other 10 million acres, the logging industry has to meet very strict standards of sustainability before any logs are cut. So that's a very encouraging victory on an issue that Greenpeace has been working on for a long time. Recently in Brazil, the president of Brazil announced that 16 million acres of old-growth forest will now be set aside as protected. This past year in the Chesapeake Bay, we were able to get a landmark regulation on overfishing. The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in North America. And if you look at projects like Cape Wind and the Long Island Wind Project, if those go online, it opens up the door, the unlimited potential that offshore wind and other forms of clean energy can provide, and that can ultimately help us solve problems like global warming.
We've been hearing from Bill Richardson. He's the Deputy Executive Director of Greenpeace USA. It's based in the nation's capital, Washington. I'm Carl Grossman. You've been watching Enviro Close-Up, and for a copy of this or any Enviro Close-Up, just check out our website at www.envirovideo.com. Thanks for watching.